Starting off this countdown, we have the married couple's parents. This story surrounds a couple named Stephen and Helen Lee. A couple of years ago, the pair got engaged when they learned something very freaky about their families. While going through family photos during their engagement party, they found photos of their parents together. Turns out that Stephen's father and Helen's mom had actually dated and were set to get married in Korea in the 1960s. But their parents' disapproved, so they didn't. Had they not disapproved, the couple would have never been born. Not only that, but what are the odds that they got together after their parents had already gotten together? Kinda awkward if you ask me. Moving on at number 9, we have the church fire. On March 1st of 1950 at 7:25 p.m., a church exploded in Beatrice, Nebraska. At 7:20, a choir practice had begun, except none of the 15 choir members were there. And it's lucky that they weren't, or else they would have perished in the fire. Turns out that all 15 members arrived late due to personal reasons. So they were nowhere near the church when it exploded. What are the odds that all 15 members were running late? This story could have ended in tragedy. Thankfully, it didn't. Moving on to number 8, we have the wedding vows. In 2007, Fred and Lynette Dubendorf were walking along a beach clearing up some litter when they found a message in a bottle. After they opened it, they found it contained the marriage vows of another couple. Upon closer inspection, they found that their marriage dates matched. The couple who created the vows in the bottle were married on August 18th of that year. The Dubendorfs were married August 18th of 1979. Both couples were also married on beaches. The Dubendorfs were in complete shock and actually reached out to the other couple. Thankfully, the couple left their address in the bottle. Both couples now believe that their marriages were meant to be, especially Matt and Melody, the couple that wrote the vows in a bottle, who had several failed marriages before finding each other. They were skeptical about getting married again, but this to them is a sign that it was meant to be. Moving on to number 7, we have Edgar Allan Poe. This is one of the freakiest coincidences I have ever read about. So in 1838, Edgar Allan Poe wrote his only complete novel. It was called The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. The book was about Arthur Pym, who goes on a nautical adventure. He hops on a boat as a stowaway and hides out there. But while aboard the ship, a mutiny occurs and a number of crew members lose their life. There's only 4 members aboard the ship now. One of the men was named Richard Parker. They kept him alive to help them control the ship. However, they encountered a terrible storm and things went south. The remaining 4 people on board are struggling to find food. So Richard was like, let's draw straws. Whoever gets the shortest straw will be killed and the others can eat them. So they did as Richard said, and he ended up drawing the shortest straw and then was eaten by his crew members. Believe it or not, but 46 years after that book was published, this happened in real life. In May of 1884, 4 men were traveling from England to Australia when they found themselves fighting for their lives. The men decided to draw straws and see who they should eat. The cabin boy drew the smallest straw. What was the cabin boy's name? Richard Parker. The same name as the guy who got eaten in the book. What are the odds of that? Is Edgar Allan Poe a psychic, or did he write history, or both? Moving on to number 6, we have Redbox. This story comes from Matinee25 on Reddit. A couple of years ago, her and her friend went to Redbox to see if they could rent the movie Tron. For those of you who don't know what Redbox is, basically it's an American video rental company that has these little kiosks you can go to and pick what movie you want, and then you can rent it and you'll get the DVD. So they went there, but they found out that they didn't have Tron. So they were like, okay, screw it, let's just rent another movie. Well, when they opened up the DVD case, turns out that inside was the movie Tron. Someone had put it back in the wrong case. But what are the odds? Because that's the movie that they wanted to see in the first place. Like, out of all the DVDs they could have gotten, they got the one with the switched disc. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the lucky numbers. So this story comes from Yamaletf on Reddit. According to them, they were working as a call center operator when they asked the caller for her birthday. The caller said it was April 20th, which was the same birthday as the operator. When the next caller rang in, their birthday was April 27th, which was the same birthday as the operator's brothers. So at this point, the operator was like, okay, what is going on? And then the caller told her that maybe it's a sign and that she should go play the lottery with those dates. And that night, she went to the grocery store, played with those numbers, and ended up winning. It was only $380, but still, that's better than nothing. What are the odds that the winning numbers correlated to the caller's birthdays? In our fourth spot, we have the birthdays. According to a woman named Carrie Lee Simmons, her and her best friend share a number of eerie similarities. First, they both have the same birthdays. Not only that, but turns out that they were born in the same hospital, and their mothers shared the same recovery room. Keep in mind that their mothers were complete strangers. Then, 17 years later, the two connected and became best friends. When they found out that they were practically born beside each other, they completely freaked out. That's how you know that friendship is meant to be. In our third spot, we have the sign. This next story is from Reddit user EricFP23. So, the day in which her grandfather died, her mother had been sitting in bed next to him, comforting him. Before he passed, she whispered to him, "Tell Richie I say hi." Richie was her ex-husband who had passed away a couple years earlier. A couple of days after her grandfather's passing, Erica and her mom were at Walgreens when all of a sudden a huge truck drove by with some writing written on the side of it. It read, "Richie says hi." I am speechless. Like, that's just goosebumps. And Erica and her mom were speechless too. It's either just a super eerie coincidence or Richie sent that message from the grave. Moving on to number 2, we have the taxi driver. I'm sorry, but this one is a little depressing compared to the other stories on today's list. In 1974, a man was riding his moped scooter in Bermuda when he was struck and killed by a taxi. 1 year later, his twin brother was riding the exact same scooter when he was struck and killed by a taxi as well. The taxi was driven by the exact same driver who took his brother's life. So not only did the twins die the exact same way, but they had been killed by the exact same person. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the life savior. When Su Weifang of China was 50 years old, he was outside near a river by his home when he saw a boy drowning. So he jumped in and saved his life. 30 years later, he rescued another boy from the river. This boy had slipped and fell into the river and didn't know how to swim. Once again, Weifang jumped in and saved this boy's life. Well, turns out that the two people he saved were related. They were father and son. 30 years ago, he saved the boy's father from drowning. Then, he saved the father's son from drowning in the same river. So they believe that this man is their guardian angel.
Number 10, twins named Jim. Okay, we'll kick this part 2 off on a lighter note. This one gets a little dark, so we'll ease our way in, you know? The twins named Jim. Okay, that sounds like a 2026 comedy hit already. Back in 1979, a set of twins were reunited when they were 39 years old at the time. This was, of course, a big moment in their lives. For 37 years, they barely knew of each other's existence. Then when they finally met, the long-lost twins had more in common than they could have ever thought. For starters, both had been named Jim. I spoiled that in the fun title earlier. But their adoptive parents both named the lads Jim. That's insane. Jim? Like, of all names, really? And both Jims just happened to love math and carpentry. Both also had jobs and security. And both also had ex-wives named Linda. And they both since married a woman named Betty. This isn't like, what? Imagine meeting another you, and he's like, oh yeah, I also love knitting and Autobots. What are the odds? No, that's too eerie. You're an alien clone. Something's afoot here. Get out of here. Not just meeting a long-lost twin at 40. No way. Number 9, Stephen Hawking. Time is relative and fascinating and all that confusing stuff. There's so many components of our universe that we still don't even understand. James Webb is out here making people turn to atheists all of a sudden. The universe is bigger than we all think, yet somehow it still gives us these once-in-a-lifetime coincidences. Or as I say, coincidence. Stephen Hawking's death occurred on Einstein's 139th birthday, which is also Galileo's 300th death day, and also Pi Day. This was March 14th. My dad has the same birthday as Daniel Radcliffe, and they're both wizards, so I don't know. Just saying. These birthday coincidences are getting out of hand. Coincidences. There it is, he's got it. Number 8, atomic survivor. On August 6th and 9th, 1945, the United States detonated 2 nuclear explosives over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This, of course, was devastating. The results in this reaction, the blast and the radiation they both caused, took the lives of nearly 90,000 people. It was horrible. But in 2009, the Japanese government confirms that there was at least one man who was in each city on both days of the reactions, and he lived to tell the tale. On August 6th, Satomu Yamaguchi was in Hiroshima on a business trip. As I was walking alone, I heard the sound of a plane. Just one, he told a British newspaper. I looked up into the sky and I saw the B-29 and it dropped 2 parachutes. I was looking up into the sky at them and suddenly it was like a flash of magnesium, a great flash in the sky, and I was blown over just like that. And by August 9th, he had returned home to Nagasaki only to experience the trauma for a second time. Despite the double radiation exposure, Yamaguchi lived to be 93 years old, which is incredible. He sadly passed away from stomach cancer. Number 7, Julianne Kopka. Miss Julianne has a 2-for-1 when it comes to survival stories. I had to include it. Her story starts out on Christmas Eve, a lovely day, 1971, when she was just a teenager and she was on Lanza Flight 508. Now the plane was struck by lightning, which is an actual nightmare situation that I didn't know could happen, and this led to the plane starting to disintegrate midair. It was all bad. In what felt like the blink of an eye for Julianne, she found herself still strapped to her seat 2 miles above the Peruvian rainforest. She was injured, of course, full of bruises, a broken collarbone, but she was alive after she landed. And in fact, she was the only person who had been on the flight that was still alive. Just fell out of a plane and lived to tell. That is crazy. That is bat insane. But it's like you're out of the fire into the frying pan at this point, right? Now you're in the wilderness all alone with no food, just, a little bit of candy, if anything, from the plane. Julianne had found a small stream which she began to wade in downstream. She traveled along it, and the insects in the jungle were eating her alive, and sorry, this next part is gross, but maggots had infected her arm. It was like bad, worse, even worse. Now we're flowing down a river and maggots are eating me. This is incredible. Julianne ended up coming across a sort of encampment where she found a few supplies, and she was so smart and was able to give herself a little bit of first aid, which included pouring gasoline on the infected arm, which then led to all the, disgusting bugs and maggots leaving it. Because they're like, hey, I'm not a fan of gasoline, lunch is over, see you later. And then just a few hours later, a few lumber workers found her, and they gave her more first aid treatment and took her to an area that was more populated, where she was then airlifted for medical treatment. Now, in 2000, her story was told through the documentary titled Wings of Hope, which was directed by Werner Herzog, who particularly took interest in the story because, one, it's obviously incredible, as I was just explaining it. I read this and I'm like, it's crazy. But two, Werner Herzog also had a seat booked on that flight, and he would have been on that same flight if it wasn't for a last minute change of plans. That should be number 1, really. Number 6, Comet family. Okay, this one's good. The odds of being hit or killed by a meteor are 1 in 2 million, or something like that, right? It's crazy. But even so, back in 1954, residents in Talladega County, Alabama, noticed a ball of fire heading towards the Earth. Now, back then we didn't have Twitter, right? We couldn't warn anybody that a meteor was possibly gonna hit us. We also really didn't know if it was gonna hit or not, or how big it was, so it was alarming. Especially for Anne Elizabeth Hodges, who got hit by said space rock. Yeah, she only got grazed, but with these odds, it's still possible. Wild. Now, cut to recent history, the Comet family in France. Their house was hit by a meteor. I'll say that again. The Comet family was hit by a... You get it, there we go. As somebody with the last name McWaters, I'm a little worried that I might drown now. I don't know. Last names seem to be a little bit of a tip-off, it seems. And number 5, World Cup. An episode from The Simpsons back in 1997 called The Cartridge Family shows Mexico and Portugal going head-to-head in football. Like soccer football, not like football, you get it. Springfield residents are told to go see this match to determine which nation is the greatest on Earth, Mexico or Portugal. So when the 2018 World Cup then rolled around much later, pun intended, fans were excited that this was now coming true, but at the same time had a laugh determining that Ronaldo must have missed that penalty intentionally so that the prediction would come true. That's like the theory now, that Ronaldo missed to make The Simpsons correct. A lot of theories for that one, it's always fun. But recently it's been announced that Qatar will host a tournament in November and December 2022 rather than usual June-July dates. Another World Cup, another chance for The Simpsons to add another prediction to their already impressive list. That's a creepy show. I have another Simpsons one coming up, but we'll see. Number 4, Mars life. We're back. There it is. There's the next Simpson one. That fast. There we go. Let me ask you lovely people a question. If you could go to Mars right now with like 3 of your friends, would you do it? Keep in mind it's really boring, and unless you're an astronaut botanist like Matt Damon, you'll probably have a rough go. But in the future, would you do it? I would. I'd go. I'd go with like 1 person, Force too many, that's too much. Going to Mars might be as simple as going to the mall. Apparently, The Simpsons have an episode where they show a family visit to the big red planet come 2051. But honestly, I feel like we're gonna get there a lot sooner. SpaceX is already planning to send people out there. It's a quick, 9-month trip, so make sure your phone's charged. But it's actually more beneficial for the team to travel during these peak times in the 2030s and in the 2050s. Because during these years, trips to the planet will be shorter and they'll coincide with periods of the solar maximum. So while this one may or may not come true in 2022, well, let me tell you, it's right around the corner, or maybe in 2050. Who knows? Number 3, Titanic inspection card. This inspection card once belonged to a woman named Marion Meanwell. And you're probably thinking, what could possibly be worrisome or, creepy about an inspection card? Well, it shows how Marion was not intended to be on the Titanic that fateful day, but by some turn of events, she unfortunately found herself as one of the passengers. The card shows that she was originally meant to be traveling on a ship called the Majestic, and for some reason the trip she originally had planned was delayed, and now she instead was assigned to the ill-fated Titanic. The eerie part is you can see the word Majestic was crossed out on her card, which then shows us the change in plans. If only people were able to see what was about to strike and they could have somehow warned her. That's the creepy thing about these coincidences. Sometimes they're just bad, You could fall out of a plane and have maggots all over you and survive, or you could go from one cursed ship to another. Number 2, Edgar Allan Poe. Okay, this is a story that actually convinced me that Edgar Allan Poe is for real a time traveler, so buckle up, grab a soda. Because 2 separate stories that he wrote both turned out to be exceptionally true and real, but not until after they'd been written. Yeah, it's a good one. Firstly, Poe's only completed novel was published in 1838, and it tells the tale of mutiny on a whaling ship lost at sea. These men on a ship realize that they're doomed and need to resort to extreme measures in order to stay alive. So they begin drawing straws to see who they're going to sacrifice to save food. A boy named Richard Parker drew the shortest straw and therefore became the next meal. Dark, let's move on. Let's fast forward to 46 years now to 1884, and in real life also, I might add. There are now 4 men who have been set adrift after the sinking of a yacht. These men found themselves in a similar predicament to the novels, and I kid you not, they ended up taking the same route and elected to sacrifice a cabin boy. A cabin boy also named Richard Parker. Odd, right? Okay. Cut to 1840, Poe penned the gruesome story The Businessman, in which the narrator suffers a traumatic head injury in his youth, and then later a violent life follows. The weird thing about this story is that Edgar Allan Poe fully understood, or so it seemed, frontal lobe injury. Now this was long before it was ever even studied or looked at, right? This type of study didn't arrive until 1848. An actual neurologist, Eric Altschuler, recently wrote how there's a dozen symptoms and he knew every single one. It's so exact and it's so weird, it's like he had a time machine. End quote. Yeah, it's almost like he had a time machine. Did he? And finally, number 1, Simpsons dome in real life. Yep, this one's gonna hit home. Let's do it. This one's gonna hit dome. That didn't work. For this one, we're looking at the Simpsons movie, which still holds up. That's a fun time. But even over the pandemic, I saw personal domes come to life, right? It was so weird. Restaurants were making these weird tents on sidewalks just to stay in business. But an even bigger idea came long before this. Back in the 70s, there were talks about putting a dome over Manhattan, this massive dome over Midtown that regulates weather and pollution, all that good stuff. Now, if that had been built, imagine what we would have done with it during the initial breakout during this pandemic. It would have been madness. And then in 2010, later on, the city called Eco City 2020 was planned out. It was supposed to be built in Siberia. It was announced in 2014 officially, this climate controlled, domed city, 4.5 square kilometers, all that good stuff. But since 2016, the project lost the funding. What do you guys think? Should we bring back domes and just, have a little personal bubble everywhere we go? Just lose the umbrella and live in a big glass ball forever over our city? I'd do it, that'd be kind of nice. Be like living in a Coca-Cola mist zone your entire life. Just kind of like, ooh, this is nice.
Coming in at number 10, we have Stephen Hawking's death day. Stephen Hawking was one of the most brilliant minds of our time and left a scientific legacy that humans will revere for centuries to come. It was definitely a sad day when he died on March 14th, 2018. Wait a minute. Isn't that 3.14? Aren't those the first 3 numbers of pi? Why, yes. Yes, it is. But wait, that's not all. Not only does Hawking's death day coincide with pi, it also lands on Albert Einstein's birthday and on the day that Galileo also met his end. I guess great minds think alike. Coming in at number 9, we have Mark Twain and Halley's Comet. They came in together, they must go out together. This was something Twain said before he died. Mark Twain was born on November 30th, 1835, which was the same year and 2 weeks after Halley's Comet flew past. During his time on Earth, Twain was famous for such works as Tom Sawyer and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And many more. He was awesome. Twain was convinced next time the Halley Comet dropped by, that would be his time to go, and he was right. On April 21st, 1910, Mark Twain met his end, which was coincidentally the day after the comet passed by once again. Coming in at number 8, The Simpsons in general. One of the longest running TV shows in history, The Simpsons are notorious for somehow predicting outrageous events, including the president of the United States was going to be Donald Trump. If you watched the episode with Donald Trump as president today, you would probably have thought it was just another comedic, satirical episode of a TV show to do at the time. But the thing is, They wrote that sucker 19 years ago. How on earth did they guess that? With the show running for over 30 years, themes occurring in the show are eventually gonna happen in real life, maybe. But this? They predicted a three-eyed fish, a circus entertainer getting attacked mid-performance, even the Ebola outbreak. I think we can safely put down The Simpsons as one large coincidence, considering the amount they've had. They happen so often that the questions of whether they are psychic or actually secretly controlling events, I don't know, these are just things we need to know. Like right now. These kinds of coincidences just need an explanation. Coming in at number 7, Catherine Eddowes and Mary Kelly. Jack the Ripper. That's pretty much all I need to say to get all the cold case crime fanatics interested. You ready? This next coincidence is a lot darker. Catherine Eddowes was one of Jack the Ripper's victims, taken only an hour after Elizabeth Stride. But this is where things get creepier. That day, Eddowes was found passed out drunk on the street and was arrested. Once she was sober enough to go home, she ended up giving the police a fake name, Mary Kelly. That same night, Eddowes was murdered, and guess who would follow in her footsteps? A woman named Mary Jane Kelly. That's ridiculous. Like, that just makes me wonder whether it actually, I know they solved the crime, but that makes me wonder as to whether, I don't know, Jack the Ripper was actually in the police force. How could that happen? How can we explain that? That's just too wild. Coming in at number 6, we have Royce Burton. Are you ever right in the middle of telling a story when the very person you're talking about like walks into the room? There are two subtle reactions. One, pretend you weren't talking about them, depending on what you're talking about. Gossiping, like just pretend. What? Oh, what's that? Oh, who's that? Oh, hey! That's what you do. And the second one, you just look at them and go, oh, speak of the devil. Royce Burton had the latter reaction, though it's kind of cooler, when the very stranger who saved his life strolled in right as he mentioned him. Royce used to be a Texas Ranger, and one night while patrolling the Rio Grande in 1940, he got lost and tried to climb up the cliff to find his way. As he was nearing the edge, he almost fell, but then the hand of a man named Joe, reached out and hoisted him up. The two men lost contact when they both joined the war, and 25 years later, Burton had become a teacher, and he was in the middle of the story when Joe strolled in. Not missing a beat, Burton said, I'll let Joe finish the story. And his whole class were like, what? These guys hadn't seen each other in 25 years, and apparently Joe had been looking for him, and the rest is the rest of the story you know. Coming in at number 5, you know when you meet that special someone and you just know you're meant to be? Some people are so lucky, and this couple got a physical sign that they were in the right place at the right time. Melody Kloska and Matt Burr were married on August 18th on the beautiful Wisconsin beach. A week later, they took their vows, placed them in a bottle, and watched them go on their merry way as they let them drift on Lake Michigan, only to be recovered by Lynette and Fred Dubendorf. To their delight and surprise, the wedding date matched theirs as they were married on August 18th, 1979, almost 28 years earlier. If that's not a sign of forever love, then I don't know what is. Coming in at number 4, speaking of signs, many people often look for the right signs when making a big decision or when looking for love. After going through a rough breakup, Esther Gracken wrote her name on several dollar bills and promised herself that she would only marry the man who brought one back to her. Wow, wouldn't you know? A few years later, a man named Paul dating Esther for a while, and he decided one day he's gonna ask her to be his girlfriend. That same day, as he was going to pay for his sandwich, he noticed that his dollar bill had Esther's name on it, written in pencil. Weird, he was just thinking about her. He decided to frame it and save it for her as a gift. When she got it, she gasped but didn't say anything until a few years later, because she didn't want to jinx it, when they were married. That was when she told him the story, and the two have lived happily ever since. Can't be explained, but it's pretty damn cute. Coming in at number 3, Parent Trap. So first off, consider the chances of actually conceiving twins. About 1 in 250, so that's already a cool thing. But then imagine you pull a parent trap and discover you have actually had a twin your entire life, but you were separated at birth, and then you find out that not only do you look identical, your lives are too. This is exactly what happened to two men when they were reunited at age 39. They were both named James, they both grew up to be police officers, and both their wives were named Linda. Each also had a son named James Allen and a dog named Toy. Then they both got divorced and both married a woman named Betty. What are the chances of that? More like 1 1 in a billion than 1 in 250. Coming in at number 2, we have Richard Parker and Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe, master of the macabre. This man's mind went to some pretty dark, albeit creative places. Some even say he predicted the future, which could be the only explanation for this coincidence. The narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket is one of his most terrifying, as it recounts the tale of sailors forced to eat a cabin boy named Richard Parker after being stranded on a boat after a shipwreck. People guffawed at Poe when he said that this was based off a true story, though there were none like it at the time. What is insanely creepy about the story is that 50 years later, the exact same event happened, mimicking the story in eerily close ways. The most ominous being that the boy the real sailors ate, his name was Richard Parker. And coming in at number 1, Violet Jessup. Luck and coincidence often go hand in hand, especially for Violet Jessup. They called the Titanic unsinkable, but I think they meant her. This woman survived not 1, not 2, but 3 shipwrecks, including the aforementioned Titanic. She was either really lucky or a bad omen, or both. Probably both. She worked as a nurse and stewardess on the HMS Olympic when it was struck by the HMS Hawk. She was on board the HMHS Britannic when it was hit by a landmine, and the Titanic, and we all know that story. Though her lifeboat was almost taken down by the spinning propellers, Violet jumped out just in time and hit her head, but she survived, ending up living to age 83. How could one woman be so unlucky and lucky to survive 3 iconic shipwrecks? Must be a coincidence.
Number 10, JFK and Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln and JFK have some uncanny similarities, and it freaks me out. They were both elected to Congress 100 years apart in 1846 and 1946 respectively. They both became president 14 years later in 1860, 1960, and both died by a fatal gunshot wound to the head, and were succeeded by a man named Johnson, who, wouldn't you know, just so happened to be born 100 years apart. Add to that some other coincidences like them dying on a Friday, their family names containing 7 letters, and the fact that they were both famous for their civil rights efforts, and you've got 2 presidents cut from an eerily similar cloth. So what does this mean? I don't know, but it sure is freaky. Number 9, the Jim twins. When 2 twin boys were put up for adoption in 1940 at only 3 weeks old, their adoptive parents coincidentally named them both James. Both men came to be named Jim for short, and that was just the start of it. The 2 would grow up only 40 miles apart from each other and live similar lives. They grew up without any contact with one another, and when they finally did meet at the age of 39, the similarities between their lives were scary. Both had beloved childhood dogs named Toy, and as school children both had a proclivity for math and woodworking, but weren't great at spelling. As adults, they both were married twice, first to a woman named Linda, then to a woman named Betty. Now, when they had sons, they both named them James Allen. They were both smokers, drove Chevys, and even chose to vacation at the same Florida beach. Now, on February 9th, 1979, the Jim twins were finally reunited. When their fascinating case came to light, scientists saw how very valuable they could be to the study of reunited twins. They took part in a study conducted by Dr. Thomas Bocard of the University of Minnesota, who found that their medical histories and brainwave tests were almost identical. So too were the results in personality tests. How strange is that? Sounds to me that they were programmed the exact same way. Number 8, double slit experiment. In physics' famous double slit experiments, electrons are fired at a photosensitive screen through slits in a copper plate, usually producing an interference pattern that indicates wave-like behavior. Now, this type of experiment was first performed by Thomas Young in 1801 as a demonstration of the wave behavior of visible light. Now, at the time, it was thought that the light consisted of either waves or particles, but with the beginning of modern physics about 100 years later, it was realized that light could in fact show behavior characteristics of both waves and particles. Some have taken this to mean our simulation is conserving its resources and rendering certain things only when it knows we're looking at them. So does this mean anything? I'm not sure, but it is something to consider. Number 7, Mandela effect. The Mandela effect is an observed phenomenon in which a large segment of the population misremembers a significant event or shares a memory of an event that did not actually occur. Fiona Broom, a paranormal researcher, coined the term to describe collective false memory when she discovered that a significant number of people at a conference she was attending in 2010 shared a memory that Nelson Mandela had died in prison during the 1980s. In fact, the former president of South Africa was released from prison in 1990 and was very much alive at the time of the conference. Now, this has caused an uproar on the internet with people discussing their experiences. For example, some people remember Mr. Monopoly wearing a monocle when he wasn't, Kit Kat with a dash in the middle, the Berenstain Bears or the Berenstein Bears, whichever you believe, and plenty more. Now, is this an accidental glitch in what we're remembering? Was it done on purpose? I don't think we'll ever know. Number 6. The Goldilocks Zone. In astronomy and astrobiology, the circumstellar habitable zone, CHZ, or simply the habitable zone, is the range of orbits around a star within which a planetary surface can support liquid water given sufficient atmospheric pressure. The habitable zone is also called the Goldilocks Zone, a metaphor allusion to the children's fairy tale of the Goldilocks and the Three Bears, in which a little girl chooses from sets of 3 items, ignoring the ones that are too extreme, too large or small, or too hot or cold, and settling on the one in the middle, which is just right. Earth exists in what astrobiologists call a Goldilocks zone, close enough to a star that greenhouse gases can trap heat to keep liquid water, but far enough that the planet does not become a hothouse. People believe that us living in such an orbital sweet spot is circumstantial evidence for a simulation. And let me say, if we were in a simulation, this would be the perfect place to keep us humans. Number 5. Glitches in the Matrix. So with all computers, there can be technical difficulties, including glitches. Now, many people believe there are real-life glitches, proving we're in a simulation. These glitches are events that seem comparable to the effects of errors in computer programs or their execution. Some examples of these include objects vanishing and sometimes reappearing, people being seen by different witnesses at different locations at the same time, or not being seen in places where they should be, aka people vanishing often for a considerable amount of times, often with multiple searches, then reappearing and claiming that they have never left the spot. Also, changes in everyday familiar objects and time slips and time freezes, where people interact with different time periods, or where they observe all movement and noises cease over a relatively short or larger area. Now, some glitches have been caught on camera, and one very popular glitch that has been documented lately is girls finding a nail that has broken off, matching their same nail color / design in their room, but they are not missing any nails. So where did the broken nail come from? No one knows, but it freaks me out. Number 4. Doppelgangers. A doppelganger is a biologically unrelated lookalike or a double of a living person. As you might have heard, there are 7 other versions of you in this world. Now, a study of lookalikes, unrelated people with faces so similar they could pass for identical twins, has found that such pairs share genetic traits. Scientists study 32 pairs of individuals with uncanny similar headshots who are a part of a long-running project by a Canadian photographer to document these faux twins. The 16 pairs found by computer analysts who have the most similar features also share more genetic variants than the less similar pairs, the researchers concluded. Now, that's not a huge surprise because researchers are already using genetics to predict face shape. The twins do not share DNA methylation patterns, chemical marks controlling gene expression that are shaped by our environment, reinforcing the dominant role DNA alone plays in determining our appearance. Number 3. Stephen Hawking's death. Now, Stephen Hawking is regarded as one of the most brilliant theoretical physicists in history. His work on the origins of the structure of the universe, from the Big Bang to black holes, revolutionized the field. Now, Stephen was seen by many as the world's smartest person, though he never revealed his IQ score. Now, as Stephen himself would tell you, time is relative, but that doesn't quite explain why his death occurred on what many consider a fairly significant day. It happened on Albert Einstein's 139th birthday, Galileo's 300th death day, and Pi Day, March 14th, where the date reads 314. Coincidence? I think not. Number 2. Philosophers. Now, throughout history, some of the world's most notable thinkers have laid out their own questions and ideas about why reality may not be exactly what it seems. According to Built-In, a significant number of people regard the simulation hypotheses as a modern offshoot of Plato's The Republic, or more specifically, the well-known allegory of the cave. In a nutshell, the scholar's allegory features cave prisoners drawing conclusions about reality from the shadows of puppets they can't actually see. Basically, a prisoner who sees the shadow cast by a book may think and draw assumptions from that shadow about what a book really is, but can only learn the truth if he breaks free and sees the actual book with his own eyes. He isn't the only philosopher though, as another example is from 1641 when philosopher René Descartes presented the idea of an evil demon powerful enough to create an illusion that looks and feels like reality. So if these people thought this and they have advanced technologies like computers, is it just a coincidence or is it more? And coming in at number 1 is Violet Jessup, aka Miss Unsinkable. Violet Jessup has some horrible luck, or great luck, however you want to look at it. In 1911, she began working as a stewardess for the White Star liner RMS Olympic. Violet was on board September 20th, 1911, when Olympic left from Southampton and collided with the British warship HMS Hawke. Now, despite the damage, the ship was able to make it back to port without sinking. She continued to work on the Olympic until April 1912, when she was transferred to the sister ship Titanic. Violet boarded the RMS Titanic as a stewardess on April 10th, 1912 at age 24. 4 days later, on April 14th, it struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sank about 2 hours and 40 minutes after the collision. She was later ordered into lifeboat 16, and as the boat was being lowered, one of Titanic's officers gave her a baby to look after. The next morning, Violet and the rest of the survivors were rescued by the RMS Carpathia and taken to New York City on April 18th. Then, in the First World War, Violet was a stewardess for the British Red Cross, and on the morning of November 21st, 1916, she was aboard HMHS Britannic, the younger sister ship of Olympic and Titanic that had been converted into a hospital ship when it sank in the Aegean Sea after an unexplained explosion. Britannic sank within 55 minutes, ending the lives of 30 of the 1,066 people on board. British authorities hypothesized that the ship had either been struck by a torpedo or got hit by a mine planted by German forces. Now, it's incredible that she survived all 3 incidents without getting injured, and she ended up dying at 83 of congestive heart failure in 1971. It had nothing to do with boats.
We always do with our number 10. Meet Alex and Donna Voutsinas. They met at work and fell in love. Aww. She was from Florida and he was from Canada. Just days before they got married, Alex was looking through some of Donna's childhood photos and stumbled across this one of her posing at Disneyland with her brothers. Alex looked closely in the background and oh my god, he realized the man in the background was his own father and the boy he was pushing was him. What? That is unbelievable. They were from different countries but somehow ended up in the same childhood picture together 20 years before they married at Disneyland as kids. Is that fate? Is that fate? I think that's fate. Coming in at number 9, we have the story of a 70-year-old man from Finland. In 2002, he was riding his bike in a snowstorm in the town of Rahe when he was sadly hit and killed by a truck. It was a tragic and rare occurrence, but just 2 hours later, another man was hit and killed by a truck while cycling less than a mile down the road. That man was his twin brother. Police said it was unlikely that the second twin had even heard about his brother's death before he died the exact same way. The first officer on the scene said that when she heard the 70-year-olds were twin brothers, it made the hair on her back stand on end. Blah, creepy. Next up at number 8, Dr. Peter Scott was the co-founder of the Loch Ness Phenomena Investigation Bureau. Their aim was to identify the legendary creature known as the Loch Ness Monster. Now, Dr. Peter Scott wanted to make sure that whatever was lurking beneath the waters there could be protected as an endangered species, but first he needed to give it a proper Latin name for it to be registered. He called it this, Nessitaris rhombopteryx. Now, the word came from ancient Greek and mean the monster of Ness with the diamond-shaped fin. But not long after this announcement, a journalist with a bit too much time on their hands, I think, decided to unscramble the letters, and they realized they were a perfect anagram of the phrase monster hoax by Sir Peter S. What? That's pretty mental, right? Come on. Can anyone explain that? Can any of you guys explain that? I don't care about all the Nessie pictures out there. You don't need to explain that. Just explain this one for me. Next up at number 7, we have the incredible story of the Jim twins. In 1940, twin boys were separated at birth in Ohio and adopted by separate families. When they finally tracked each other down at the age of 37, they found out that they had both been named Jim. But oh, the weirdness was just getting started. Jim and Jim both had childhood dogs that they named Toy. When they grew up, they both married women called Linda. They both then divorced their respective Lindas and remarried women who were both called Betty. They both had a son who they have both named James Allen. They both got tension headaches, smoked the same brand of cigarettes, drove the same model of car, and went to the same part of Florida for their vacation, and the list goes on. I think they're both wondering why the other one had to copy them so hard. Like, dude, can you just get your own life, Jim, and stop copying mine, Jim? Number 6. In 1975, the Royal Gazette paper of Bermuda reported that a man called Erskine Ebbin had been hit and killed by a taxi as he drove his moped. What was crazy about this though was that Erskine's brother had died a year before too. He was killed on the exact same moped. He was hit by the exact same taxi with the exact same taxi driver, and here's the real kicker. He was carrying the exact same passenger in the back both times. Whoa! I'm personally surprised the police didn't arrest that passenger, because he might have been some sort of like genius murderer who kills his victims with like taxis. Next up at number 5, we're going back to Detroit in 1937, where a street sweeper named Joseph Figlock was out, sweeping the streets when a baby fell out of the sky and hit him on the head and shoulder. The baby had fallen from the 4th story of a nearby building and likely would have been killed if Joseph was not there to stop the fall. That was strange, but Joseph carried on with his life for another year, but then, while out sweeping a completely different street, another baby landed on him from a nearby building. Again, it hit Joseph on the head, and again the baby survived. This guy was like the strangest superhero of all time, saving babies with the power of his cushiony head. And now at number 4, in the 1920s, there were 3 Englishmen on a train in Peru. They were all travelling separately and had never met each other, and were already pretty surprised that there were 3 English guys on a train together on the other side of the world. Then they introduced each other. The first man's surname was Bingham. The second man's surname was Powell. The third man raised his eyebrows in shock and announced to the other 2 that his surname was Bingham Powell. Whoa, the chances of that happening are mental. At number 3 now, we have the story of Michael Dick from England, who wanted to get in touch with his daughter Lisa, who he had not seen for 10 years after splitting up with his wife and moving away from his home. He tried everything, but when all else failed, he asked for some help from a local newspaper. They took this picture you're seeing now for the article. Amazingly, Lisa saw the article, but before she could get in touch, she realized something incredible. She saw herself in the background of the photo with her mother. They had actually taken a picture just there moments before and were walking away when Michael took this picture. The very person he was trying to look for after 10 years was in the photo he used to find her. I bet that's going to be a very important family photo. Coming in at number 2, in 1914, a German mother took a picture of her newborn son to be developed in Strasbourg, but before she could collect it, World War I broke out. The woman had to leave the picture there and considered it lost forever. Then, 2 years later, she was in Frankfurt, over 100 miles away, and now she had a new baby girl. Again, she went to get a picture of her daughter developed, but when she got it back, she was quite annoyed to see there had been some sort of double exposure with someone else's picture in the background. It wasn't someone else's picture, it was her picture of her son that she took 2 years before, over 100 miles away, that had somehow ended up in a different store, marked unused, and had been sold back to her, where she then put another picture of another child of hers on top of it. And finally at number 1, we're going back to 1899, where a man was struck and killed by lightning while standing in his backyard in Taranto, Italy. That's incredibly unlucky. The chances of that happening are very low. But guess what? 30 years later, in 1929, his son was also killed by lightning in the exact same place. Okay, that's crazy, right? That is crazy. A father and a son from the same family being killed by lightning in the same place. What are the chances of that? Well, 20 years after that, on October 8th, 1949, a man called Roller Primada was also killed by lightning on exactly the same spot. He was the son of the second victim and grandson of the first. Incredible. I'm seriously wondering if that family was like made out of metal or something, because nobody should attract lightning that much.
Coming in at number 10, a leading Nazi was on a last-minute vacation during the D-Day landings. A huge British wartime victory could have been very different if a German field marshal hadn't chosen that exact time to take his wife away. During the Normandy storm of 1944, Erwin Rommel, known as Desert Fox, decided to take his wife on a surprise trip for her birthday. He was a key strategist and a military tactician, and had he been in Normandy, things could have turned out very differently. The scary thing about this coincidence is how different the world could be right now if the Allies lost the battle. Coming into number 9, we have the sinking of the SMS Captain Trafalgar. Okay, so this is some mind-altering stuff, stick with me. The British Navy converted a cruise ship, the RMS Carmania, into a warship. They disguised this as an existing German passenger liner called the SMS Captain Trafalgar. This was in order for the vessel to escape detection. Now it worked, and the actual Carmania, disguised as the Trafalgar, sank a German ship. Now this ship was the actual legit real-life SMS Captain Trafalgar, which the Germans had decided to disguise as the RMS Carmania. What? Maybe wind that back and listen again if you don't get it, because it's taken me like 10 times to understand. This is a freakish coincidence. Anyway, the sinking of the German ship was a huge setback for the German war effort and impacted the way that they moved forward. 51 Germans were killed and 279 captured. Who knows what they could have achieved in the war had they not been on board. Coming into number 8, Seth MacFarlane and Mark Wahlberg missed their flight on 9/11. Family Guy and American Dad creator Seth MacFarlane and actor and former rapper Mark Wahlberg were both supposed to be on planes involved in the 9/11 attack. Both men were scheduled to be on American Airlines Flight 11, which is absolutely insane. Now coincidentally, MacFarlane's travel agent told him the wrong time for the flight and he was late. He missed the plane. Now this plane would have ended up being flown into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Wahlberg made a last-minute decision to fly to Toronto for the film festival instead. If they had died that day, the world would have had no American Dad, The Cleveland Show, or any Wahlberg movies, including Ted, on which the pair collaborated together, and of course no Wahlburgers, which is obviously a travesty. Coming into number 7, we have Tamerlane's body and Operation Barbarossa coincidence. Tamerlane was a Turco-Mongol conqueror and the founder of the Timurid Empire. He lived between 1336 and 1405, but his tomb was opened and his body exhumed by the Soviets just days before the Nazi troops launched a planned attack. His tomb was said to hold a curse that read, "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble. Whomsoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." Now 3 days later, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion of all time, with heavy losses. This is a really scary coincidence. Barbarossa, of course, was an event that changed the world and also marked the decline in Hitler's stronghold. Coming into number 6, we have the weird events surrounding the sinking of the Titanic. Now the sinking of the Titanic was eerily foreshadowed in Morgan Robertson's The Wreck of the Titan. The story, written in 1898, so 14 years prior to the sinking of the Titanic, depicts scarily similar circumstances. A luxury ship, the Titan, is hailed as unsinkable. It then hits an iceberg on a cold April night and goes down. Sound familiar? Also in the book, the boat is a similar size and length to the Titanic. It travels around the same speed, and drumroll, there were not enough lifeboats for passengers. Is this a weird coincidence, or was Robertson a clairvoyant? Obviously the sinking of the Titanic really did change history for, ever. Coming in at number 5, we have Lewis and Clark almost not making it through their expedition alive. Captain Meriwether Lewis and Lieutenant William Clark crossed the western point of the United States between 1804 and 1806. Their journey and discovery shaped modern America. At one point, the pair were captured by a Native American tribe. Their female guide Sacagawea discerned that the tribe planned to kill or desert them, but it all turned around when she discovered that the leader of the tribe was actually her long-lost brother. weird. She was stolen by a rival tribe when she was younger, and she only just recognized them then. As a result, the crew were gifted horses and allowed safe passage. What a coincidence. If that hadn't have happened, well, honestly, who knows. Coming in at number 4, we have the savior that was Teddy Roosevelt's thick speech. Theodore Roosevelt was very nearly killed in 1912 when he campaigned for re-election, but he was saved by a thick speech and a glasses case. In an eerie coincidence, Roosevelt placed the folded up paper and glasses case in his breast pocket, the exact area he was shot by a saloon keeper, John Flaming Schrank. He was saved by the contents of his pocket, and as he was not coughing up blood, he concluded that his lung hadn't been pierced, so he would continue his speech. On stage, he said, "I shall ask you to be as quiet as possible. I don't know whether you fully understand that I've just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose." Bull moose. Good. Coming into number 3, we have the eerily weird circumstances surrounding the assassinations of President Lincoln and President Kennedy. So the assassinations of Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy have some very strikingly similar circumstances. Lincoln was the first president to be shot and Kennedy the last. The pair were both killed on a Friday before a big public holiday. They both sat beside their wives who weren't injured. Both were succeeded by a vice president named Johnson. Andrew was born in 1808 and Lyndon in 1908. Both had 2 daughters. At both assassinations, the presidents were with another couple, the male of which were wounded. Lincoln's assassin shot him at a theatre and then fled to a warehouse, whereas Kennedy's killer fired at a warehouse then fled to a theatre. Both assassins were then killed by shooters with a cult rival. Just so many weird things. Obviously both assassinations changed history forever, and like, who knows what was going on there. Coming into number 2, we have the 3 cigars that created America. Having grown up in the United Kingdom, I wasn't taught a lot of the finer detail about the American Civil War, so I literally just learned about this insane, world-altering coincidence while researching for this video, and I'm like pretty shook. Basically in 1862, Confederate Commander Robert E. Lee drafted a war plan called Special Order 191. Now this outlined the movements of the Confederate Brigade over the next few months. This was every Confederate brigade. He gave copies of these orders to his trusted generals, including the somewhat lazy Stonewall Jackson. Jackson then gave some copies of these to his commanders, even though he probably shouldn't have, because they probably didn't have the authority to have those plans themselves. One of his commanders in turn, Daniel Harvey Hill, totally discarded his. He wrapped them around 3 cigars and then left them at a campsite when his brigade moved on. Days later, Union Scout Barton W. Mitchell found the cigars. As he was about to smoke them, he looked at the wrapping and thought that they looked actually pretty important. It was. The wrapping then ended up in the hands of General George McClellan, who recognized Robert Lee's handwriting. With the plans, the Unions were able to stage a full offensive at the Battle of Antietam. Now this was a tipping point in the Civil War that gave the North the upper hand. Finally coming into number 1, we have a truly crazy coincidence. This one turn of a corner changed the world forever. That's right, we have Franz Ferdinand getting shot. The spark that ignited World War I was a total coincidence. Scary really how the peace of Europe hung in the balance with such fragility. Basically what happened here was that Austro-Hungarian leader Archduke Franz Ferdinand escaped an initial assassination attempt while he was in Sarajevo. A bomb was thrown under his motorcade by the Serbian Black Hand Gang. Luckily, or so he thought, Ferdinand survived, but in some final destination-style turn of events, the initial assailant, Gravillo Princip, happened to be in a cafe where the Archduke's motorcade drove by again. This time, his car stalled and gave him enough time to shoot him and his wife. This was the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of the ignition of World War I, and what a scary coincidence, and this really did change the world forever.
In our number 10 spot today, we have the man who survived 2 atomic. If you went to history class in high school, then you probably will remember hearing about the 2 atomic that the US dropped on the 2 Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. 90,000 people were killed due to the blasts and the radiation. But in 2009, the Japanese government confirmed that a man was in both of these cities during their and he survived both of them. Come again? Yes, a man named Tajumu Yamaguchi was on a business trip in Hiroshima on August 6th when he looked up at the sky and saw the B-29 and it dropped 2 parachutes. Before he knew it, he saw a great flash in the sky and he was blasted by the impact. By August 9, he was back home in Nagasaki recovering from the incident, only to endure it again. Even though you would probably think that he might not have lived long due to the radiation exposure, he actually lived to 93 and passed away in 2010. That's an insane story that makes you think out of 90,000 deaths this man survived, he must have had a higher purpose. Coming up in our 9th spot today is more of a historical pop culture moment that scientists just wouldn't be able to explain. The discovery of the twins named Jim, a personal favorite of mine. You may or may not have heard of this story before, but personally I think it's fascinating. In 1979, a set of twins that were separated at birth reunited at the age of 39. When they met up, they discovered some pretty crazy coincidences. Both of the boys had adoptive parents that named them Jim. Both of the boys loved math and carpentry, and both pursued a career in security. But the coincidences don't end here. Here's where you start thinking, there must be something else going on that we don't understand. Are you ready? Both boys married women named Linda. Both boys then divorced their Lindas, and both remarried women named Betty. What? Shivers. But it doesn't end here. They both had children and named them James Allen. Mind blown. Like total shivers right now. In our 8th spot today, we have the ship survivor. Imagine being on the Titanic and surviving that horrific accident. Then imagine being in another ship that ended up sinking and surviving that, and then being in a ship collision after that. That's definitely enough to make me never board another ship again and perhaps also have PTSD whenever I see water. That was the case for Violet Jessup, who was a stewardess aboard the RMS Titanic in 1912. She managed to aboard a lifeboat after being handed a baby to look after. Years later, she was aboard its sister ship, HMHS Britannic, in 1916 when it had sunk. She actually almost died in this sinking as she was on a lifeboat that got sucked under by the propellers, but she jumped out in time. She was also aboard the RMBS Olympic in 1911 when it collided with the British warship. So to say that she lived quite the life would be an understatement. She actually died of old age in 1971. In our 7th spot today, we have the arguably fateful death of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. I say arguably because, well, just you wait and you decide. Yet another story that I hope you learned in history class, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand and the beginning of World War II. You may have learned that he died after an attack on his car, but you may not know that the bomb that was meant for his car actually hit the car behind him and the attempt failed, and Ferdinand was able to get away unscathed. The assassins, we can imagine, were probably feeling hangry, due, of course, to this failed attempt and most likely hunger, as they then decided to stop at a nearby cafe for a sandwich. The Archduke, probably thankful to be alive, dashed off and continued on to safety when his driver took a wrong turn and ended up in front of the sandwich shop. The assassin saw him, shot him and his wife, and thus began the whirlwind of World War II. Makes you think that perhaps he was fated to die, or maybe he was just having a really bad luck day. I would love to know your thoughts in the comment section below. In our 6th spot today, we have the deaths of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. In 1775, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams became good friends fast. They worked together to draft the Declaration of Independence, and they also spent time together as diplomats for the US in Europe. They had a falling out in 1801 when Jefferson became president over Adams, and they didn't reconcile until 1812. On July 4th, 1826 though, the day that America declared its independence 50 years prior, Thomas Jefferson passed away. But what's interesting is that John Adams, in another state, was on his deathbed, only to say the words, "Thomas Jefferson survives," and then he passed away. Does this mean he saw Jefferson's ghost greet him on his deathbed? They both ended up passing on the same date, and not only that, but on the date that was seemingly their historical purpose. Coincidence? I think not. In our 5th spot today, we have the saving of Robert Todd Lincoln. You may or may not know this, but Robert Todd Lincoln is famously known as the son of the former US President Abraham Lincoln. In late 1864, Robert was traveling from New York to Washington when he found himself leaning against a stopped train. When the train started moving, he fell onto the tracks, only to be saved by an actor named Edwin Booth. When he later realized that his savior was the famous actor Edwin Booth, he made sure to thank him. It wasn't until much later did Edwin learn the identity of the man he saved, as he was the son of the president whom was shot by Edwin's brother, John Wilkes Booth. That's too weird of a coincidence for me. I guess perhaps if Lincoln's son had died, maybe Lincoln himself wouldn't have been where he was on that fateful day that he passed. In our fourth spot today, we have another weird coincidence revolving around Robert Lincoln. The death of not one, not two, but 3 American presidents occurred right in front of him. Highly sus, Robert. The first was, of course, his own father's assassination, President Abraham Lincoln. After his death, Robert and his mother moved to Chicago, where he planted roots, got married, had children, and created his law practice. He continued to work in politics as the Secretary of War under the presidency of President James A. Garfield in 1881. But while at a railroad station in Washington with Robert and a few others, Garfield was assassinated. Then in 1901, Robert was invited to attend a Pan-American exposition in Buffalo by President William McKinley, only to witness his assassination. Apparently, Robert has been quoted as saying that there was a certain fatality about the presidential function when I am present. Is there, Robert? Or did you perhaps concoct the death of your father with your savior Edwin Booth and his brother John, and then perhaps all these other incidences after? In our third spot today, we have the comet family. It is said that your odds of being killed by a comet is 1 in 1,600,000, so not very high. You're more likely to be hit by lightning, and even that is 1 in 500,000. And so of course, on top of these odds, no one would expect that a comet would hit the home of a French family named, can you guess? Comet, or comet. I love the French. Comet. What are the odds? Probably in the trillions. Thankfully, nobody in the family was hurt, and they now have their very own space rock as a souvenir. Life is so funny and weird. In our number 2 spot, we have the Civil War house. In 1861, when the Civil War broke out with the First Battle of Bull Run, it at some point made its way through the garden of Wilmer McLean in Virginia. After the mass devastation, Wilmer decided to leave his home and he moved to a new place, Appomattox, Virginia. But of course, the war followed him there and actually came to a close when Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse, just only steps away from McLean's new property. Poor guy, he just wanted to live a peaceful, war-free life. Is that too much to ask for? Or perhaps he's psychic and he knew that peace would happen in this particular town. Who knows, but interesting coincidence. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the very interesting birth and death of Mark Twain. Mark Twain was born on November 30th, 1835 in Florida, Missouri, the day that a very special comet was in the sky, Halley's Comet. The Halley's Comet returns to the Earth's vicinity approximately 75 years, give or take a bit, due to the gravitational pull of the planets that it passes. About 74 years later, Mark Twain made a prediction that his death would coincide with the comet's next appearance, just like his birth. He was known to have said that it will be the greatest disappointment of my life if I don't go out with Halley's Comet. The Almighty has said, no doubt. Now here are 2 unaccountable freaks. They came in together, they must go out together. And he was right. He ended up dying April 21st, 1910, the day after Halley's Comet made its return. It was also a very special day as it was the first time the comet was captured on camera. Pretty awesome if I do say so myself.